Welcome to the CannaBiz Success Show. If you're a cannabis company owner or operator who's ready to scale your business, grow your profits, and plant the seeds to take your business to new heights, this show is for you. We'll share expert insights, industry trends, and actionable strategies to help you blaze a trail of success in the cannabis industry.
Aaron Smith is the co-founder and chief executive officer of the National Cannabis Industry Association. The NCIA is the largest trade association representing legal cannabis in the U.S. and the only one that's working to advance policy at the national level. So prior to launching the NCIA, Aaron was involved in California with the public advocacy marijuana policy reform. And so he talks a lot about that. He talks about that in the episode in his intro. And he's built coalitions with elected officials, building these relationships. It's a big part of moving policy forward. And most impactful in all the years of cannabis state-run programs is the potential reschedule in 2024. So this is the year where we could see the biggest forward movement in the cannabis world. And so we get into some of that. But today we're going to talk about policy at the federal level and what's next. At one point, we get into some state level initiatives, such as how California is treating hemp derived products and comparing and contrasting that to other markets. And I love what he has to say about what is going well in some markets and what we can learn, so we can implement that into new programs. And so make sure you stick around to the end when we talk about lobby days, and that's happening in Washington, D.C. And if you were looking to get involved to shape policy, what you can do by attending lobby days. So that's what's coming up right now. So enjoy our conversation with Aaron Smith. All right. Well, welcome to the CannaBiz Success Show. Today, we are joined by Aaron Smith, CEO and founder of the NCIA. As a firm, we are members of the NCIA. Aaron, we love what you do for the industry and our members. I don't know if you remember, but we tried to catch up at Benzinga, and it was a wild goose chase with everything going on and all the conversations. So we didn't get to meet in the lobby. So I'm glad we got you here today, and I'm looking forward to getting into all things policy and all the great things that the NCIA is doing this year. It's going to be it's a pretty big year, and I'm sure with you've been around in cannabis for a very long time. You might agree that it seems like one of the biggest years that we've had, definitely from a federal standpoint. And so we'd love to share stories here about what is working, because you hear so much in cannabis about the difficulties, right? The things that aren't working, but we do know that success is possible, and policy is a big part of that. And the NCIA represents what you call mainstream cannabis, right? And I know from my background is in large corporate, actually, but when I became a virtual CFO, our clients are now in the 2 to 20 million, so more of the small business. And what I can say from a policy standpoint is I remember being a part of the corporate PAC and how impactful it is to get to know your policymakers, to influence policy, to get issues resolved all the way down to the very local level. But small businesses don't have those resources to have a PAC and to have people going out to Washington. And so the NCIA does a lot of that great work for the industry and for those who aren't well represented. So thank you for everything you do for the industry. But so today we're going to be talking about policy. The major policy movers this year and what we can expect, maybe what members and others can do to move policy forward. But before we jump into all that, Aaron, can you just tell us about your background? How did you get into the cannabis space and founding the NCIA and become the CEO of the NCIA? Can you just kind of give us the path, the trajectory over the last few years?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me, Guillermo. It's great to finally connect with you and be here and connect with your audience. NCIA is proudly the largest trade association in the cannabis industry. And we started back in 2010 when I was working for the Marijuana Policy Project, another great organization in the state of California on various issues, and we saw an emerging industry there and in Colorado, to some extent Washington, in 2008, 9, 10. And it became readily apparent that industry needed a voice at the national level, and that while NORML and MPP and the groups at the time were doing fantastic work representing cannabis consumers, there wasn't really anybody to represent the industry, to talk about the issues that affected the industry more intimately, such as 280E, the banking situation. And so we started NCIA to fill that void. We fast forward to today, so back then we were the only voice for the industry. And there were no states had legal marijuana yet. We knew Colorado and Washington were on the horizon, but they had not passed their laws yet. Fast forward today, where we have just over half the country lives in a state with legal cannabis. There are hundreds of lobbyists in DC working on cannabis industry issues. But like you alluded to, we're the only one representing small and independent businesses. The rest, it's kind of scary that the number one group lobbying on this issue right now is primarily funded by big tobacco. And then after that, you have the largest MSOs that have their own lobbyists, and they've got their own K Street firms working for them in DC. And then there's us, and we represent everybody else. And we're making sure that, not only do we get federal legalization, but we get it right, and we do it in a way that small and independent businesses can thrive and not be squashed out by the larger interests.
So was there a time, in that, as you move forward to create the NCIA and saw the need at the national level, was it focused on the non MSOs from the very beginning, or was there a moment where you said there's a need for small business, for the social equity applicants, for that piece of the market, or how did you come to see that need?
Yeah, I mean that need developed a few years ago. Yeah, in the beginning, we were the voice of the whole industry, and there were no MSOs back then, right? And so, but as we started seeing just the playing field in DC get more and more crowded with advocates working on this issue, and make no mistake, I'm glad they're there working on this issue, and for the most part, we agree on policy matters. But it became more apparent that there needed to be a voice for Main Street cannabis specifically, and that we couldn't let the dialogue be completely dominated by the top 3 to 5 MSOs. But I would say that NCIA from the beginning has always been a very democratic organization. We've always been, our members, for example, elect our board of directors. They serve on committees that inform our views. So we have always wanted to ensure that we were representing the industry broadly. But I think that the positioning around Main Street cannabis is something that that really evolved in there's sort of an epiphany about 3 years ago around that really was the space we occupied, and now we're making a point of making sure, I guess, people know that's the space we occupy, because it is confusing. There's so many groups and acronyms out there, not to mention, like I said, big tobacco and other interests working on this issue nowadays.
Yeah, and it's a huge need, right? I mean, the regulated cannabis market, for the vast majority of the members that you say, it's difficult, and in a lot of ways it's not working. From my perspective, I look at the dollars and profitability, and the biggest challenge is taxation, also competition. And I've talked to those who work, raising capital, and it's just like, it's so hard. It's non-existent in a lot of cases. So for a small player, or for someone who doesn't have the financial backing, it could be really difficult to get your business moving forward after year 1, 2, and 3, or when competition gets much tougher. What is the biggest there's a lot going on right now, but what do you see as the biggest mover, the most impactful from a policy standpoint that we could see this year that would really help Main Street cannabis move forward and continue on?
Yeah, well, I think you mentioned the tax issue. That's one of the biggest issues facing the industry broadly. 280E, which is a little known provision outside of the industry, but very well known provision of the tax code in the industry that prevents us from taking ordinary business deductions on our tax on federal taxes. And I mean, businesses that are facing, essentially paying on their gross receipts and facing double, triple the effective tax rate of other businesses. And that for something we've been fighting in Congress for a long time, and have had a real uphill battle getting any relief through Congress. But the good news is this year we're anticipating a rescheduling of cannabis from the administration, from the DEA. This, if you back up to and rescheduling cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 would remove the burden of 280E. If you back up to last year, the president had directed the FDA and the Department of Health and Human Services to provide guidance and recommendations on the classification of cannabis. It's, to remind listeners, it's currently a Schedule 1 drug under federal law, which is alongside heroin, LSD, drugs that are deemed to have no medical value and a high potential for abuse. Well, we all know there's significant medical value in cannabis and relatively low potential for abuse. Toward the end of the year, the HHS and FDA recommended moving from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, which Schedule 3 has some medical value and some potential for abuse. And that puts this alongside drugs like ketamine, anabolic steroids. So, it's not legalizing. But for whatever reason, 280E only applies to Schedule 1 and 2 drugs. So while the move to Schedule 3 doesn't fix all of our problems, it will present some complications, in fact, probably. It will resolve the issue of 280E, which is huge. I mean, that's millions and millions of dollars now on the balance sheets of companies that have currently been saddled with this unfair provision of the tax code. And I see, our position at NCIA is that cannabis should be descheduled, regulated in a different, creating a different pathway, regulatory pathway at the federal level. It's probably more akin to alcohol. But that's still a ways off. And, we're still going to push for that. But rescheduling, fixing 280E, also acknowledging the medical value of cannabis is going to present an opportunity to build on the momentum to get to further reforms in the coming years.
And you went through the steps, but as we stand right now, what is the next step and what are we really waiting for this to move forward? And then I'm going to ask, just administratively, as you see it, is there still a chance that the reschedule could happen in 2024?
Yeah. So the next step is that the DEA now has the recommendation, and they're the only agency that has the authority to reschedule or deschedule a drug. Now, Congress could, or the DEA. That's the way that the Controlled Substances Act is written. So it's up to the DEA to act on the recommendation. They do not have a set period of time to do so. So it's well considered likely imminent, but really nobody knows exactly when this will come down. And what they will do is they will announce what they're going to do with the recommendation. They do technically have the ability to just ignore it, and they have ignored rescheduling petitions and such in the past. But the difference with this one is initiated by the President of the United States. So that it's a huge difference than other efforts to reschedule in the past. They could do something. My worst nightmare is that they could do, well, let's split the baby here and do Schedule 2, which would really do nothing for the industry because it would still have the burden of 280E. But I think the more likely outcome is the most positive one, which is what we're hearing from inside the Beltway. What just seems to be, and also just seems to be the likely outcome based on precedent, is that they will accept the recommendation. They will announce that. And then there will be, in whatever they do, there will be a public comment period. NCIA is preparing public comments, and also will be encouraging our members to prepare public comments to submit to the DEA during that period. It'll probably be a 30 to 60 day time period when that happens. And then it'll go through an administrative review. I do think it is likely to be completed this year. It's an election year. We can't ignore the politics around this. Is that President Biden is not, he's an octogenarian and not a huge fan of cannabis, but the smart people in his orbit that want him to get reelected are telling him, you've got to do something on this issue. And so I think, that's one reason that they're going to want to get this done before the election. And I think it's doable, but we probably are going to need to see that public comment period and everything open soon, because the clock's ticking and these agencies don't move fast.
Yeah, so 30 to 60 days, we're already in March. If you're talking mid-year, you start pushing into third quarter. So this is really something that needs to happen second or third quarter. How long after the comment period would you see it go into effect?
My understanding is that it'll be just a handful of months. It won't be wouldn't take very long. I think that they want to get this buttoned up before the election. Also, because if the administration changes, on the political side, they want the points with voters that 2/3 of which support legal marijuana, and more than that, even according to some polls. But also, just on a practical matter, administrations don't like doing administrative actions that are going to be undone, a year later or a handful of months later. So I think they're going to want to get this buttoned up by at least by the end of the year, completely done. But I think from a political perspective, they want to be making a big splash and make an announcement, certainly prior to November.
Yeah, and I think there's those that are listening that say, well, how can I get involved and what can I do? You mentioned the comment period. I know for like say a state level recreational program, education, voter turnout has a lot to do with re-educating voters. In many cases, at the federal level, how impactful is the comment period, and the stakeholders coming forward and trying to influence this thing to move forward? Is it a big piece of the puzzle, or what is the impact there for getting members or anyone to comment, and how do they do that?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly is, and people, it's easy to become jaded around the political process in this country for clearly obvious reasons for anyone watching it. But the those in power do actually listen to constituents, especially electeds. Now the DEA is not an elected; they're not run by an elected body, but other than the president. But it will, they will want to be able to show that there is a large number of Americans who care about this issue and that are going to support, a move to move cannabis out of Schedule One. So the way, we will make through, anybody can come to our website, thecannabisindustry.org, sign up for our newsletter, and we will be sending out information on how to submit those comments. There'll be a portal like directly through the DEA's website to do that. We'll provide talking points, templates, and ways to make that easy for you. We're also collecting comments from our members to us about, how they view rescheduling and its impact on their business, how they have seen the regulated market benefit their community or individuals within their community. And then we're compiling some of that into our public comments that we'll be submitting as an organization to make sure that we're representing not just the views of us and our board, but the broader interests of our hundreds of members across the country.
Is there anything that really stands out for the small business, as we see it today, that we want to make sure in the reschedule that there's not a disparity between how, say, larger MSOs or small businesses are impacted by the rescheduling? Is there anything that really stands out, or any things that we need to change as things stand now?
Yeah, I mean, one of the big things that we need to ensure happens is that there needs to be enforcement guidance provided to the FDA, because moving cannabis from Schedule 1 to 3 will move it doesn't legalize cannabis, but cannabis isn't legal now, right? But what it would do is it would move the jurisdiction of the FDA. It would create, theoretically, new laws. There'd be new laws that were now the Food and Drug and Cosmetic Act specifically that now our industry is in violation of. And the FDA is not going to, no one envisions SWAT teams kicking down the doors of businesses that are selling Schedule 3 drugs, but there is a potential that the FDA, using its bureaucratic machine, could send out letters to everyone saying, "Hey, you're violating this act because these products aren't approved by the FDA." So, and while I don't think that's certainly not the intent of relaxing the cannabis laws from the Biden administration, it's something that we do need to be cognizant of. And we're working with the administration to create a memo that would say, that makes it clear that state legal operations that are licensed under state law should not be disrupted under this system. But also working with Congress to ultimately get a budget rider that ties the hands of the FDA to say you cannot spend tax dollars going after businesses that are complying with state law, just to make sure, because especially for the small businesses, just getting a letter like that might be disruptive enough that it ends your time in the industry. So those are the kinds of things that we need to make sure make sure that members of Congress know that rescheduling is not the end. We're not declaring victory and going home. It's one step in the right direction, and that the onus is still on Congress to act to go further, because it would have been sort of unheard of, I think, for the administration to deschedule. And I guess I didn't even include that as one of the options. The DEA could go further and say, we're going to deschedule cannabis. Now, I mean, the odds of that are astronomically against us, but because the system, usually they want to have Congress, which represents the people, buy in on any big change. So we need to make sure Congress understands we need on the incremental steps. While there's rescheduling, we need to make sure that there's clear enforcement guidance that to protect state legal businesses. We also are going to work to try to get retroactive relief for 280E, because rescheduling will fix 280E in 2025 and beyond. But we have businesses that have been operating for a decade or more that have tax bills dating way back, and so we need retroactive relief, and that the hands of our Congress holds the power to do that only.
Yeah, and how do you see that? Would you be proposing a 3-year, 2-year, or how do you see a retroactive relief on 280E?
Well, we're still talking with our allies in Congress on what that could look like. We would want to make that actually indefinite, and that allow anybody to apply for a refund on that. I will say that it's not likely we will get exactly what we want. There's negotiations that have to happen, and it's not a particularly popular issue, even on the Democratic side, because you're giving tax money back to businesses. But it's important to us that if we get 2-3 years, that I would consider that a huge victory. But
Yeah.
we're gonna push for even more.
Yeah, even a year and just the inflow of cash from the first effective year of a reschedule is huge. 3 years is obviously triple that, and just the level of funds that would come back into the industry, and then further investment, just because companies are more profitable. It's just so exponential on
Yeah.
what the extra dollars could do. So shifting on into the more the state level, we've been focusing on the national. You also hold the stakeholder summit events. You recently had one in California, and there's one coming up in Missouri. And we want to get into the dates and how folks can attend those. But can you talk about, or let's go ahead and go into that, like what are the NCIA stakeholder events we'll be attending here in the next couple of weeks? What can folks hope to gain from attending some of those state level events that the NCIA puts on?
Yeah, thanks for bringing these up. So the stakeholder summit events we just launched this year. Our first one was in California a couple weeks ago. We featured Nicole Elliott, who heads the California Department of Cannabis Control in that state, as well as Congresswoman Barbara Lee, the majority assembly majority leader as well to talk about issues affecting the state. The discussion was very well centered around the need for regulating hemp-derived cannabinoids in the state, which is a big hot topic in almost every state. As well as we had another panel discussion on what we were just talking about, federal rescheduling, how that's going to impact the industry, and kind of the outlook for federal reform. We do these events so that our members get an opportunity to have an audience with regulators and lawmakers, because that's, I see as an association, that is one of the biggest value, some of the biggest value we bring to our members is that we're connecting you to those who have influence over your business, like a regulator. In that, it's a lot harder for an individual business, especially a small business, to call up a regulator and get to talk for half an hour just with them one-on-one. But through an association, we can create that forum to help guide policy in the right direction at the state level. So we do have that was our first. We've got 3 more coming. You mentioned Missouri. That's the next one. St. Louis on March 28th. And we, thank Anders, you guys, for sponsoring these events for this event. That's at Tech Artista downtown St. Louis. We haven't quite even announced it yet, but you're hearing it here first. Amy Moore, the director of cannabis regulation in Missouri, will be a speaker there. We also have some other elected officials that are kind of in the works that we'll be announcing in the coming weeks. And then we have events, similar events with similar lineups in Denver, Baltimore, April 2nd, Denver, April 4th, as we head into the spring.
Yeah, these events are just hugely beneficial from connecting, but also just getting in front of policymakers, because that's already facilitated. I mean, I just remember like what it took to get in. Like you mentioned, it's so hard to call up a policymaker and get 5 minutes in their office, but it's extremely valuable to get to know them, to get in front of them. And without a pack where you can, take a donation and go see them and get that appointment, it's very hard to get your foot in the door. So these events, for those listening, are a great opportunity at a low cost to be able to get in front of those policymakers. So you mentioned hemp in California. Let's talk a little bit about that. And so I know there was a bill. I saw it on the website, AB 2223, about integrating. The intent is to integrate hemp into the cannabis supply chain. Can you talk about what that really means to integrate hemp into the supply chain? Does that mean that it would fall under the state cannabis program, or how would that really happen, and how is it happening in California? And then we can maybe move on to contrast how Missouri is handling the hemp program.
Yeah, so they are. I mean, there is a legislation in both of those states that would fold hemp-derived cannabinoids, intoxicating cannabinoids, into the state's program, and it's we want to see, and I think both of these, the legislation is in both states is very well intentioned and moving things in the right direction. I think there's a lot of details that are still being worked out, but both places on to make sure that this doesn't kill the hemp industry, but also levels the playing field for hemp and marijuana, and creates the public safety guardrails that we need for an intoxicating product. So our view on this is that the cannabinoids, whether they're derived from hemp or marijuana or even biosynthesized, should be treated the same according to their use. So if something is a topical, non-intoxicating CBD balm that you're buying at Whole Foods, well, that's going to have one regulatory pathway. That's a lot different than an extracted product or a gummy that that you're going to take and have a intoxicating effect. And but they should be treated the same. And so the legislation in California attempts to do that. Our view on that one is that yes, the hemp products should be folded into the system, but there's also over-regulation in that system, and that marijuana providers should be subject to less regulation at this point, frankly, and hemp providers or hemp-derived cannabinoid products should be subject to a bit more. and to kind of level that playing field, so that all that matters is that we have we should continue to have a vibrant industry that can replace criminal markets. So a big concern we have is that, in the States, this is apart from the hemp issue, but it's increasingly difficult to see that criminal market go away because of the regulations and the taxes imposed on our industry. When you have, especially in a place like California, where you have the criminal market's been thriving for decades and decades before there was ever legal marijuana. And we do need to see comprehensive reform. Part of that reform is bringing in hemp-derived cannabinoids into the system.
So, do you see it as still a gray area in how the two states are operating right now, California versus Missouri, before we have uh, any policy around this? Is there still kind of some uncertainty, or
Yeah,
there's
I mean,
some
there's
great?
incredible
Yeah,
uncertainty
yeah,
in states that don't. We have the farm bill, which created this kind of loophole for hemp-derived products, which, of course, it was great that hemp was made legal in the country, but no one really contemplated the idea of Delta 8 being synthesized from these products and then sold in grocery stores or liquor stores in places that didn't have marijuana programs. So, we think that, that's a growing segment of the industry and it's not going anywhere. And we need to create this system, an ecosystem that allows both products to thrive. Both, this is all one plant. Cannabis is marijuana, hemp it's all cannabis. And Delta 8, Delta 9, it shouldn't be treated separately. At the federal level, we support continuing to allow for hemp to be legal, of course, but then have sensible regulations on specifically products that are intoxicating, and both marijuana again and hemp products.
yeah. So you're in at the state level as well, and getting to see what the different markets are doing well and not well. I mean, all the when you think of California, it's what you hear more than anything is it's a saturated market. Prices are coming down. Based on the recent event, what are some things that California is doing well, or maybe shifting into the next couple of years, and what can we learn about from some of the changes that are going on there?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're starting to see that the tax regimes are not sustainable, and that there's been some tax reform over the last year that has improved conditions for the industry, but it hasn't gone far enough. And so, and then I think addressing the hemp issue is certainly a positive step, but the state really, I think, needs to completely overhaul its system and realize that the purpose of this isn't just to make revenue for the state. Because and that you're not going to actually do that sustainably and consistently through over taxation, because businesses, a, a great number of licenses in California have just been abandoned because they're not folks have gone back into the criminal market, or they moved on and went into another industry altogether. And so, California should be a lesson to the rest of the country. And frankly, sadly, I love California, and I'm a native Californian myself. But frankly, is a lesson learned on what not to do in almost every way. And
Yeah.
but it is heartening to see that regulators and policymakers are beginning to understand that and slowly making some changes, around the tax rules that have made some advances.
Yeah, there's just no absolute way to get all the taxing jurisdictions talking and really understanding what they're doing to price out the product in the eyes of the consumer. That makes it just extremely difficult to be profitable when you're tacking on excise and sales taxes to the end consumer. And
Yeah,
so, yeah,
and
a lot of the education that you do and at these events are helping these policymakers see that, yeah, maybe in the short term, this is bringing in dollars, but in the long term, I think y'all did a study on what the impact of 280E going away, and how businesses thrive, generate more revenue, and actually a positive effect. But we have to think about it long term.
Yeah, yeah, and I think we've had a kind of a confluence of challenges as an industry. I think the significant inflation of a couple of years ago pushed a lot of folks into the criminal market, and some of them haven't returned. That's when you have an option between you're between paying $5 and for paying $3, you're going to go for the $3 thing, right? Or that's what, and whether it be groceries, cannabis, we were caught up in all of all of the verticals that were impacted by inflationary pressure, and while that's easing now, we're still seeing sales as it have been slumping, and it's not that people all of a sudden are using less cannabis. The cannabis consumption, it seems from all indications, is consistent and if not growing, but it's not
Increasing.
happening. Yeah, so it's just not necessarily being procured in the legal industry, and so the whole purpose of these laws was to, and from the perspective of a public health, and from the perspective, frankly, of most voters, wasn't to make it easier to get cannabis for everyone because cannabis is fun. They wanted to make sure that the criminal market was put out of business because there's violence associated with it. They wanted to make sure that cannabis was tested so that it had so it was safe and it was properly labeled so that there were less public health concern around it. Those are the things they care about. So the only way to ensure that we get those aims is to have a thriving legal industry that is attractive to consumers, so that they're not going into the industry the side of the industry that isn't testing its product, that isn't labeling its product, isn't checking for IDs, and isn't paying taxes or giving back to the community in the way that our legal businesses are.
Yeah, it should just be so obvious that you can't tax a product like this to the consumer or to the business itself and expect consumers to continue to buy a product 10 times the cost that they could get it elsewhere. It's just simple economics, and it's gonna take some time, but like you said, that was the original intent, and all these years later, and we're just not there yet. So getting closer, back to your comment at the very beginning of the conversation, is that things are hopeful, and it's one huge step. 280E going away and the reschedule is a huge step. So we've talked a lot. Uh, we've talked a lot here. We're getting kind of towards the end here, and I think our listeners are really going to benefit. Those who are listening, they want policy to move forward, and you've touched on how people can get involved, whether joining the NCIA or the comment period that is coming up. There's also events where people get together for policy, right? And a big one is lobby days that is coming up. Can you, as we wrap up, maybe talk about lobby days and how folks can get involved, and what is lobby days?
Yeah, thank you. So on every year, we bring together cannabis industry leaders from across the country to lobby Congress, and we set up 2 days of meetings with members of Congress, their staff, and it's a way for it's a way for us to do 200-300 meetings across Capitol Hill in 2 days, and it's also a way for our members to really understand how the sausage is made, so to speak, in DC. It's a really great experience. It moves the dial in a way that nothing else does in this industry, and frankly, every industry does this, but NCIA is the only organization doing it for the cannabis industry. And so we encourage our folks or anyone listening to come out meet us May 14th through 16th in Washington, D.C. We have the event starts off with a kind of casual opening network reception on the night of the 16th or the 14th. And then we get you really busy all day on the 15th meetings. We supply training on how to lobby Congress, how to meet with elected officials, and talking points on the important issues. We also put members in groups, so you're not out there by yourself. We have members who've done this before, and they lead groups of 4, 5, 6 people across the hill. And then we close with a ending reception that will feature a number of members of Congress and key champions and VIPs in Washington, D.C. The event is it's our 12th year of doing this. It's also the first year we've opened it up to folks who are not members of the association. We want to just get as broad and diverse of a audience there as possible. So I really want to encourage everybody to go to our website, thecannabisindustry.org. You can click on events and find out about the stakeholder summits we discussed. Those are free for members, the stakeholder summits. If you're not a member, it's a nominal fee to attend, so it's still open to everyone. And again, the lobby day is happening May 14th through 16th. All that's on our website, thecannabisindustry.org.
Well, now I don't even have to ask where can people connect you or find out more, because you covered it. And so no excuse not to get involved, whether at the state level. Some may not be able to travel to DC, but there's plenty of events all around the country where folks can get involved and get involved at the state level. So Aaron, it's been a pleasure speaking with you today. I know our audience will find this conversation hugely valuable, especially those who are looking to get more involved. And it's challenging out there, right? But success is possible. We keep saying that. We're here to help you find your own success in the cannabis world. Connecting with a national organization, or the only national organization like trade group such as the NCIA, is a part of that success, and getting to know others and working together. So Aaron, thanks again for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on the CannaBiz Success Show.
Thank you.
Enjoy this podcast? Visit our website, anderscpa.com/virtual-CFO-cannabis to get more tips and strategy for achieving business success in the cannabis industry.